Many authors have proposed that media attention increases perceptions of risk of fear of terrorism and crime and relates to how much attention the person pays to the news.
We've had an attack.
The relationship between terrorism and the media has long been noted. In the fiercely competitive media environment, when a terrorist attack occurs, media outlets scramble to cover the event.
My expectation is we're going to see a lot more of that kind of attack.
In doing so, the media help to further the message of terrorist organizations. To summarize briefly on the symbiotic nature of the relationship between terrorists and the media, the recent history of terrorism in many democratic countries vividly demonstrates that terrorists do thrive on the oxygen of publicity, and it is foolish to deny this.
James Richard Cross is reported to have been kidnapped a short while ago by as many as 4 armed men believed to be FLQ terrorists.
This does not mean that the established democratic media share the values of the terrorists. It does demonstrate, however, that the free media in an open society are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and manipulation by ruthless terrorist organizations.
A peaceful uprising against the president of Syria 7 years ago has turned into a full-scale civil war. The conflict has left more than 350,000 people dead, and devastated cities. Even before the conflict began, many Syrians were complaining about high unemployment, corruption and a lack of political freedom under President Bashar al-Assad, who was in power since 2000. In March 2011, pro-democracy demonstrations erupted in the southern city of Deira, inspired by the Arab Spring in neighboring countries. When the government used deadly force to crush the dissent, protests demanding the president's resignation erupted nationwide. The unrest spread and the crackdown intensified. Opposition supporters took up arms, first to defend themselves and later to rid their areas of security forces. Mr. Assad vowed to crush what he called foreign-backed terrorism. The violence rapidly escalated and the country descended into civil war. It is now more than a battle between those for or against Mr. Assad. Many groups and countries are involved, making the situation far more complex and prolonging the fighting. They have been accused of fostering hatred between Syria's religious groups, pitching the Sunni Muslim majority against the president's Shia Alawite sect. Such divisions have led both sides to commit atrocities, torn communities apart and dimmed hopes of peace. They have also allowed the jihadist groups Islamic State, IS, and Al-Qaeda to flourish. And Syria's Kurds, who want the right of self-government but have not fought Mr. Assad's forces, have added another dimension to the conflict. The government's key supporters are Russia and Iran, while the US, Turkey and Saudi Arabia back the rebels. Russia, which already had military bases in Syria, launched an air campaign in support of Mr. Assad in 2015 that has been crucial in turning the tide of the war in the government's favor. The Russian military says its strikes only target terrorists, but activists say they regularly kill mainstream rebels and civilians. Iran is believed to have deployed hundreds of troops and spent billions of dollars to help Mr. Assad. Thousands of Shia Muslim militiamen armed, trained and financed by Iran, mostly from Lebanon's Hezbollah movement, but also Iraq, Afghanistan and Yemen, have also fought alongside the Syrian army. The US, UK, France and other Western countries have provided varying degrees of support for what they consider moderate rebels. A global coalition they lead has also carried out airstrikes on his militants in Syria since 2014 and helped an alliance of Kurdish and Arab militias called the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, capture territory from the jihadists. Turkey has long supported the rebels, but it has focused on using them to contain the Kurdish militia that dominates the SDF, accusing it of being an extension of a banned Kurdish rebel group in Turkey. Saudi Arabia, which is keen to counter Iranian influence, has also armed and financed the rebels. Israel, meanwhile, has been so concerned by shipments of Iranian weapons to Hezbollah in Syria that it has conducted airstrikes in an attempt to thwart them. The damages are heavy. As well as causing hundreds of thousands of deaths, the war has left 1.5 million people with permanent disabilities, including 86,000 who have lost limbs. At least 6.1 million Syrians are internally displaced, while another 5.6 million have fled abroad. Innocents' homes are destroyed, their lives as well.
I hope they don't destroy Idlib the way they destroyed Ghouta. But the regime cannot be trusted. I don't know, maybe we will die here, and our fate is to die here, especially since the world always remains silent.
Since the start of the war/conflict, all sides have used media, and in particular social media, to try to discredit their opponents by using negative terms like Syrian regime, armed gangs/terrorists, propaganda, US/Western/foreign involvement, etc. Internet played a major role in the organization and coverage of the protests/armed uprising. The Facebook page The Syrian Revolution 2011 was the largest Facebook page in support of the Syrian uprising, and it reported news related to the uprising and provided guidelines for protests. There also were Twitter accounts like one about a child purportedly tweeting in English from Aleppo as the city was being destroyed.
We will live in camps, Salim said, and we have no one to help us.
Between January 2012 and September 2013, over 1 million videos documenting the war have been uploaded and have received hundreds of millions of views. Prominent videos include the rebel commander Abu Sakhar cutting organs from the dead body of a Syrian soldier and putting them in his mouth as if he was eating them. He called rebels to follow his example and terrorize the Alawite sect, which mostly backs Assad. Syria is ranked as one of the most repressive country in the world. It has been rumored that Syrian Arab news agency television sometimes interviewed government supporters disguised in locals who stand near sites of destruction and claim that they were caused by rebel fighters. Someone reported that a TV channel paid $50,000 for smuggling phones and satellite communication tools to Syria's rebels. The boss of this channel is the brother of the leading member of the opposition Syrian National Council, so they put pressure on their journalists to use the term martyr for slain Syrian rebels but not the pro-government forces. Propaganda exists since the beginning of the conflict. The Syrian Arab News Agency, the official government news agency, refers to the FSA and ISIS as armed gangs or terrorists, while other media sources use extremists.
Look around you while you sit in comfort and ask yourself, is this how you want to die? Know that you will be resurrected in Yawm al-Qiyamah the way you lived your life. And you wish to be resurrected with the dust from Bilad al-Kufr still in your lungs.
ISIL, which is also fighting in Syria, includes thousands of foreign fighters and has become a magnet for jihadi volunteers from Europe and North Africa.
It's very significant that ISIS is using English. That means they have ambitions to attack Western countries. These videos attract certain people, young people, who find violence exciting.
Last month, Munir Muhammad Abu Salha, a 22-year-old from Vero Beach, Florida, became the first American suicide bomber in Syria. ISIS released clips showing the attack, declaring the feat a victory for them. U.S. officials say dozens of U.S. citizens are already in Syria. They're worried not just about the Americans currently there, they're even more concerned about the ones who might come back and plot attacks against the homeland.
Existing studies on the strategic communication, or propaganda of Islamist groups have largely examined the content they provide. While little research has been undertaken on the first publications of Islamist groups in the form of videotaped messages and printed magazines in the 1980s, due to a lack of accessibility, the first websites used and run by terrorist groups, from the mid-1990s onwards, were often dismissed for their limited reach. Qualitative studies of those websites appeared when in the early 2000s the first videos appeared online, yet generally providing for studies with small samples, somewhat limiting the external validity of their findings. The advent of social media in the 2010s and the use of the latter by terrorist groups for their own strategic goals, have since been the research subject to numerous studies, analyzing both the diffusion and content of those publications, specifically most recently focusing particularly on the use of social media by Daesh.
Oh British government, oh people of Britain, know that today your citizenship is under our feet.
He speaks English with a British accent and seems to be a replacement for Mohammed Emwazi, the man known as Jihadi John, the masked ISIL executioner killed in a U.S. airstrike in November. This new English speaker is the latest tool in ISIL's propaganda arsenal.
Existing studies on the strategic communication, or propaganda of Islamist groups have largely examined the content they provide. While little research has been undertaken on the first publications of Islamist groups in the form of videotaped messages and printed magazines in the 1980s, due to a lack of accessibility, the first websites used and run by terrorist groups, from the mid-1990s onwards, were often dismissed for their limited reach. Qualitative studies of those websites appeared when in the early 2000s the first videos appeared online, yet generally providing for studies with small samples, somewhat limiting the external validity of their findings. The advent of social media in the 2010s and the use of the latter by terrorist groups for their own strategic goals, have since been the research subject to numerous studies, analyzing both the diffusion and content of those publications, specifically most recently focusing particularly on the use of social media by Daesh. France conducts high-level dialogue with its main partners in the area of preventing radicalization and participates in multilateral discussions on this issue. Efforts to stop the use of the Internet for terrorist purposes remain a key focus of our counter-terrorism action. France is conducting high-level dialogue with digital companies to achieve rapid and lasting withdrawal, in 1 hour maximum, of terrorist content online. Since the launch of the EU Internet Forum in 2015, we have made progress in tackling terrorist content online. We have enhanced our understanding of how terrorists misuse internet platforms and put the necessary mechanisms in place to address it. Of course, more needs to be done by more companies, which is why the EU is currently in the process of adopting legislation to step up our collective efforts against online terrorist content.
This death cult of Islamic extremism.
We continue to stand unequivocally, not only with our French friends and allies, but with also all of our partners who are dealing with this scourge.
We do face a very serious Islamist extremist terrorist threat in Europe, in America, across the world. I'm quite convinced we will come through it and we will overcome it, because in the end, the values that we hold to, of freedom, of democracy, of having open and tolerant societies, these are the strongest values there can be. And in the end, we will come through.
Nevertheless, the trust established within the forum will have a critical role in implementing the regulation, once it is agreed, and the forum will continue to be on the front line of EU efforts against terrorist content online. Building on the voluntary cooperation established in the forum and through the work with Europol, over 77,000 pieces of content have been referred to internet platforms, 84% of which has been removed so far. The database of hashes which companies developed within the EU Internet Forum now contains nearly 100,000 hashes and helps ensure that terrorist content is not re-uploaded once it has been identified. In addition, civil society organizations seeking to drown out the terrorist narratives by providing positive alternatives are also being supported with EU funding through the Civil Society Empowerment Program, which has earmarked €12 million in training and funding civil society partners to mount counter-terrorist narrative campaigns online. On another side, social media is a strength for society. Facebook, Twitter and others relate quick informations, and allows users to be aware of what is happening in the world. As an example, Crisis Services enables people affected by a disaster to warn their friends that they are safe, to find or offer help, and to get the latest news and information. Facebook I'm Safe. This new feature that aimed to report that we are safe on Facebook, has been a huge success, after the terrorist attacks that hit Paris. In general, social networks have largely reacted to attacks. Several initiatives have been put in place, starting with Twitter, which, as of Friday, circulated the hashtag #PortOfAlert, inviting the citizens to welcome at-home citizens blocked or victims. Very soon after the attacks, logos circulated, as well as other hashtags, hashtag Pray for Paris, hashtag Nous sommes unis, or hashtag Je suis Charlie, on the model of what had been done after the shooting in the premises of Charlie Hebdo. Hashtag Jesus is Charlie has become the main keyword to express his solidarity and emotion on social networks after the attack that hit Charlie Hebdo.
Today social media help to better target and reach audiences. Thus, they are a mean and a medium to access to power. We could see that during the French presidential election in 2017, all candidates understood how important were social media in a modern political campaign. They all had an account on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, allowing them to have a maximum social media presence and coverage. This social media strategy for presidential campaigns was first used by Barack Obama in 2008. Indeed, at that time he focused on Facebook and LinkedIn, but he already knew that this medium helps to target new and different audiences. That is why he hired Chris Hughes, Facebook's co-founder, to help him during his campaign. He used social media to spread his program and convince potential electors. He reused this strategy to be re-elected in 2012, but he added new social media such as Twitter and Instagram in his tweet form. Warriors was the most viral of the year 2012. Using social media in a politics helps to avoid traditional media, press, TV, radio, control the image and the information. Besides, it also allows to reach a younger audience. And what is said on social media will also be used by traditional media. Communication on social media is more collaborative. It creates a two-way communication between the internet users and political figures. Social media helps to make the candidates true people that we can appreciate because they appear as friendly, likable, trustworthy and fun. More than political figures, they become pop culture just like Barack Obama. On August 14, 2018, President Donald Trump tweeted another terrorist attack in London. These animals are crazy and must be dealt with through toughness and strength. After a car crashed into a security barrier outside the Houses of Parliament in London, UK. The problem of this tweet is that it called the incident terrorist while it was still in the early stages of investigation. This use of social media to talk about terrorism is biased. Indeed, Trump uses this X and Twitter to promote his own politic of banning and excluding immigrants. He uses Twitter in events like this to associate terrorism and migration. The French President Macron also uses Twitter to talk about terrorism. For example, he tweeted about the terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka and New Zealand to denounce this act and send prayers to the victims. This use seems without ulterior motives and less calculated. The purpose of social media to talk about terrorism is not only to inform but also to give and share opinions. However, used by politics, social media can become important weapons that influence thoughts and actions.
When you open your heart to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice.
Nowadays, terrorism is an accepted part of our society.
Là, vous vous imaginez la vie de ces gens qui basculent.
Je me suis longtemps refusée à m'apitoyer sur mon sort, parce que je me dis qu'il y en a qui sont restés, quoi.
Tu veux ne plus avoir ces images, ne plus avoir ces pensées, ne plus avoir ces souvenirs. Mais en même temps, il faut pas oublier ça. Jamais.
From wars to terrorist attacks, the big visual media such as Netflix or Hollywood have a major influence on the representation of terrorism in the United States. Indeed, Hollywood cinema has shaped and sometimes distorted the perception of terrorism. However, due to media's influence, Hollywood offers a mediated version of terrorism. The Italian novelist Umberto Eco claimed that 70% of our knowledge derives from watching Hollywood movies. Therefore, it shows how influential the big media are and highlights how terrorism is perceived and known about through media such as movies and Netflix. The entertainment platform that is Netflix offers TV shows or documentary series about conflicts. Netflix takes over many documentary series related to burning social phenomena. Indeed, after the terrible terrorist attacks in Paris in November 2015, Netflix has released a documentary called November 13th, Attack on Paris, recounting the course of this attack and showing exclusive images.
C'est que je prends une vidéo et je l'envoie à mon père. Étrangement, je saisis mon téléphone et je vois que mon père m'a envoyé un message. Coucou David, attentat au Stade de France, fais attention.
Édition spéciale.
Fusillade dans le centre de Paris.
Plusieurs explosions ont été entendues.
However, this is what the media have led to build. People want to see images of terror. Because of Hollywood's war movies, viewers are used to seeing blood and therefore are eager and curious to see the exclusive images of these tragic events. Also, Netflix is interested in the phenomenon of terrorism in more detail with a documentary series of 10 episodes called Terrorism: Close Calls. This series explores the workings of terrorist plots, and the strategies put in place by the American authorities to counter them.
People in the West have absolutely no idea what terrorism is. You drop your wife off in the morning and at 2 o'clock you bring a dead body home? Without a clue? Gone just like that?
The producer of the series emphasized the investigative dimension of the series, which is supposed to reveal the other side of the story to the public. Everyone hears about successful terrorist projects, but the success of our intelligence and law enforcement services is much more impressive. This series therefore aims to highlight the efforts made by the authorities to counter terrorism, aiming to show citizens that their country protect them.
To witness how the once quiet capital is becoming a city of fear.
Those two examples show how the big media can have multifaceted influence on viewers. As November 13th, Attack on Paris shows testimonies and is based on real facts. Spectators have a direct transcription of the horror of terrorist attacks through a popular medium like Netflix. This can have many negative aspects when we know that Netflix is used by many young children or teenagers who can easily access these realistic documentaries that expose them directly to violence. Similarly, in the documentary series Terrorism: Close Calls, accessible on the platform, the violence of terrorism strikes the spectator's heart. Even if the latter is intended to reassure the population about the effectiveness of law enforcement in dealing with terrorist risks, it can still be frightening for young spectators. However, it is important that people are informed of these risks because they are part of our current society and are a reality in many countries around the world. We can therefore see that platforms such as Netflix can be approached in different ways. On the one hand, it is a medium that can have the task of being an information medium by relaying documentaries on terrorism, its risks, challenges and consequences. But on the other hand, a medium like Netflix can also put too much emphasis on the violence of terrorism to an audience that is too young. Indeed, many young people can be influenced by Netflix series, and this can take a form of promoting violence and terrorism that can be fascinating in some cases. We must therefore pay attention to the place occupied by the media on such sensitive and important subjects as terrorism in order not to promote it but to prevent it. To conclude, media has a lot of advantages concerning terrorism, and help to identify and reduce attacks every day. But media also allowed the terrorism movement to keep growing by recruiting a lot of young people on other countries. The spread of informations about terrorism helps citizens on identity danger and to realize the impact of terrorism attacks and groups, and prevent from propaganda and recruitment that are done online by ISIS group. But media are also used to save lives from terrorism. #BringBackOurGirls is the hashtag of the campaign launched on social networks, for the 276 high school girls kidnapped in Nigeria by the Boko Haram sect.
Let us all pray for their safe return. Let us hold their families in our hearts during this very difficult time. And let us show just a fraction of their courage in fighting to give every girl on this planet the education that is her birthright.
Michelle Obama has taken the unique step of delivering her husband's weekly presidential address to express outrage at the kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls. Speaking for the first time instead of the U.S. president, before what is Mother's Day in the U.S. on Sunday, she said the couple were outraged and heartbroken over the abduction of more than 300 girls from a school in Chibok on 14th of April. Many celebrities posted their picture on Twitter or Instagram with the same sentence, including Malala Yousafzai, the young Pakistani who miraculously survived a 2012 Taliban bombing and won the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 2013. People like the British model Alexa Chung or the American actress Jada Pinkett Smith also participate in the campaign. GN. So what is the future of media concerning terrorism? Will it increase our chances to reduce this dangerous entities that spread terror and fear?